Okay, I've spotlighted my video for everybody, so it should just be my face on the screen. I've also muted you all. That's so that the camera doesn't flick to you when you speak. So just when I send out the recorded class, it's my face that can be seen. So your anonymity is protected. And if you do want to ask any questions as I work, you're more than welcome to use that chat button, which, as you know, well, I'm on my computer, so I just hover across the bottom bar and it pops up. So you can, a bit like watching a Facebook Live, that's where you can type your questions in. And as long as I see it, I will reply straight away. If I miss that for any reason, when I finish the sort of formal recorded bit, I'll take you all off mute and we can have a proper Q&A. And if you're staying to make and create later, we can have a proper old chat. So do you want to give me a wave or a yes in the comments if you're planning to hang around to make and create? So lovely, lovely. And shall we make a start then? So how did your flowers get on last week? So last week it was the bucket and spade. And did you spot that I was on holiday? So this is the bucket that I made my flowers in, and I gifted them to my sister, and she was very pleasantly surprised to receive them. So it's quite nice gifting your flowers on. And then she did the classic, as you can see. She's given me back my bucket, and she's also given me back the piece of flower foam. So perhaps we ought to do a video on that one day about whether you can reuse your flower foam. So actually, when I pick it out of the bucket, it still feels reasonably heavy, and there is we shouldn't do this, a degree of moisture there, but you can see where it's all being gouged out, and you can see how big the holes are from my sunflowers. I did have 5 sunflowers, but I can only see 4 holes. I'm not quite sure where the 5th one went in, but she'd given it back to me saying, I thought you could just turn it upside down and start again. So I might make a little video of that for my next, my YouTube channel, just to test whether you can re-soak your foam. In theory, if the foam hadn't totally dried out, you could keep it up with moisture. And because I had such a deep piece of foam and the flowers would only have gone into about this level, I guess I could turn it up the other way and make use of it. But my advice is always to use a brand new piece of flower foam for each project that you're working on. So that was last week. What about next week? Well, next week it's about wine bottles. So we're imagining we're on our holidays, we've rented our holiday cottage, and I've noticed that artisan gin seems to be a thing. Everywhere I went last week, there were little boutique off licenses selling locally made gin. So sadly, gin and me don't mix. But I've been to the charity shop for next week's class, and I think I've probably shown you these on a Facebook Live. I have picked up some glass vases, which is my version of a wine bottle. So it could be a wine bottle full or empty. Yes, sorry, I had a message come up. Yes, you're right, that different types of bottles will make an interesting arrangement. And of course, you could just use one bottle. This is more of a carafe, and I don't quite know whether these ever had anything in them or whether they were just decorative items. And this is like a pretend vintage milk bottle. I'm sure it's never been near a pint of milk. So you could have it, singly, or a grouping of them would look quite nice. And I thought, actually, I don't normally use coloured glass, and I may yet change my mind before next week. But I thought the coloured glass did remind me of holiday time, because you quite often get we would be a bit more light-hearted perhaps in our choice of crockery and glassware. But it sort of made me think of sea glass. I know it hasn't got that worn feel to it, that sort of frosted look to it, but it's certainly got the the original colour of sea glass. That might be quite interesting to use. As I say, I don't normally go for colour, so we'll have to see whether I do produce these this next week, or whether I decide to stick with my selection of clear glass bottles. But looking on the screen, it might be better if I use the coloured ones, because you probably see more clearly what I'm going to be doing. So these don't have to be bottles. It's something, empty bottles. They could be full bottles. This might be an idea if you're going to, if you're going to be a guest at someone's house, if you're staycationing at their place. that you could, you know, decorate a bottle of wine or a nice bottle of mineral water or a cordial. I had a delicious rhubarb cordial while I was away. I wish I'd bought it from the place that I had the drink at, because I've been searching everywhere for it since. It could be jam jars, or it could be that you've got a really nice vase that you just fancy needs a bit of an, you know, a revamp and a remodeling. So we are going to be decorating the bottles, notionally putting a stem in. I'm imagining a single rose or a single gerbera, but all the action is going to be on the badge or the brooch that we create on the bottle. So the secret ingredients for next time's class is it's a sticking plaster. We are going to put a sticking plaster onto the bottle and use that as the base for creating our little flower designs. So you'll be needing some glue for this. So either the Florist glue, the cold glue that comes in a toothpaste tube, but probably for speed, I'll probably use my hot glue gun, because the cold glue doesn't dry immediately. And instead of things sliding around, I might just, for demonstration purposes, use my hot glue gun. And if you fancy it, sometimes, you know, chenille sticks, I'm getting all American now, pipe cleaners, if you coil those up, it gives us sort of a better surface to stick your flowers to. So we're going to go a little bit minimal, a little bit on the craft side of things next week. So I've got quite a lot of flowers this week, and next week will be next to nothing. So if you've got a bunch of flowers that's looking a bit old this week, see what you can save, because you just need tiny pieces next week. Or it may well be that you've got little things in the garden you can pick. So as I always say, my garden, I'm looking across at my garden is totally green. There appears to be no flowers growing in it at all, but I'm sure if I hunt around, I'll be able to find a few sprigs, and we won't need much at all. So I shall just move those out of my way, so they're not on camera. I might take the opportunity just to shuffle you back a bit further so you can see what I've got. So this week we're going to, I called it Fun with Cocktails and Flowers, something like that. It had a cocktail in the title and a flower somewhere. Flower Cocktail Fun, it might have been, FCF. So what I have got as my basic container, I am working on something that's really, really small, because this is another activity where there's not a high skill level to it. It's a time factor. And if I was to make my my little cocktail glass as big as I wanted to, it's going to take me too long to do. So I will show you the after before we get started, so you can see what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to be using a tiny, I call it a jam jar. It's not a jam jar. I think it had anchovies in it or olives or something like that. So I've got a tiny jar. I did originally think that I would nestle my tiny jar into another glass jar, so I could have my fresh flowers in the middle, and round the edge in that gap I could use my drinking straws. But I have subsequently just adapted the technique that I'm going to use. So I'm not going to use the snuggle method of glass in glass, but that is a really good trick to use. If, for instance, you wanted to pack your outer glass with slices of lemon, you could have flowers coming out of apparently a cup, a beaker that was filled with lemon slices. So that's the trick of doing it. And it's just finding something that nestles down in between the two. So I'm going to put my little jar to one side because I'm not going to use it. But what I am going to use is elastic bands. These have been picked up from the street when your post has been delivered. And I'm going to be using paper straws. So I bought these straws. There's 144 straws in there. So a little quiz for you. I can remember at primary school being taught all the old-fashioned phrases for groups of numbers. So is 100, well, perhaps before I tell you, what is 144? Is it a gross? Is that a gross of straws? You'll have to let me know in the comments or the chat afterwards. I have a feeling though that 144 was one of these set numbers. I've also got some wool, because we're going to do a little wrapping and weaving, for want of a better word. So I have got, it's just, it looks white on the screen. It's a pale pink wool. It's probably a double knitting. It's just something I had in my stash. And an alternative would be to use your bind wire. So you do know that we've used bind wire a lot in class. It comes in more colours now. I've got it in a browny tan, a green, and I have seen it online. I've got a red at Christmas, and I think there's a brown as well. The reason why I'm not using this today is because I'm just slightly concerned that with having to demonstrate and do things quite speedily, that I may damage my straws. So it's slightly heavier working on the hand, and my straws are quite delicate, and I didn't want to come away with crumpled straws. But if you've got a bit more time to work and you don't have your wool to hand, I would say the bind wire would look really good. Now the bind wire is also going to show up, so it's going to give you quite a nice contrast, where the wool I've chosen is going to blend into my straw. So again, that's a decision to make. Do you want to use your binding material to blend in, or do you want to make a statement and have it showing up? So off to the side as well, you can just see I have got a recent charity shop find. This is my £5 jug, and the idea, as I'm going to finish my arrangement and set it up with my cocktail in my vase here, with my flowers here, perhaps I will even put a few books underneath, so it looks as if a little bit like the teapot arrangement we made way back when, and it looks like the cocktail is flowing out into the drinking glass. So I've now moved that out of the way, and the eagle-eyed amongst you will have seen the prototype of what we're going to be making. I'm just going to move that out of the way as well. This is what we're going to be making, and this, you'll probably recognise it. So one of you here did ask for me to give me your demonstration how to make this, and I can't remember where you spotted the picture. So I have made this round a jam jar, and you can see it's quite a chunky monkey, which is why I've decided to make it on a much slimmer jar. So it may be you've not got a jar, you might have a highball tumbler. The trick is though to get something that is straight up and down. Try not to use a container that's fluted outwards or outward or downwards like that, straight up and down. So it's paper straws like that. And I have, it's got the trick here is a double rim of paper straws on the outside. And because this jam jar was quite large, I have folded down alternate straws to create this fan effect. And then I have woven my wool around the edges to create that little look. And then underneath it just looks like a band of wool. Now, as I turn it over, I can see some slight imperfections, and I will tell you about those later. I don't know why I'm pointing them out, because you won't be able to see where they are. The problem was I was winding and winding, and then for some reason I must have got distracted and I missed one occasionally. So my I've got some bits of wool that go behind the straws and haven't gone around them, but I think from the front I really shouldn't have drawn your attention to the imperfection there. But that is going to be our cocktail glass with a few flowers in, and perhaps even a straw going in to sort of give that visual connection between the jug and the glass. So shall we get going? So all I've got in front of me, a pair of scissors, the world's tiniest jar, and again that could be a highball jar, jam jar, if you like to be, temporary elastic bands, they will come off, and a ball of wool, and of course my paper straws here. Behind you can see I've got quite a lot of flowers. There's such a small arrangement, but right at the end, when I finish my little jam jar, I'm going to come and show you just a really simple flower arrangement in a vase. It's sort of two projects in one today. Aha, so I can see that I was right. 12 dozen gives 144, which is a gross. Amazing, isn't it? I've remembered that fact from my being 8 years old. So round of applause to all of us who got there in the end. So I got huge flowers. In fact, these are very similar to the flowers I used last week. I went to the same supermarket. Yellow sunflowers, they're going to be huge, but they're going to look great in my jug. Then I've got purple asters and then yellow roses. You remember my dilemma last time? I had the white roses to sort of fill out the quantity of flowers I had, and then they didn't go with my very vibrant coloured flowers. I've also got behind the yellow roses some pink, deepish pink spray carnations. And then there's a sort of fluff of greenery out here, and that is some ivy. It's sort of quite shrubby ivy. And I'm going to use that to fill out my vase. And if you have more interesting, again, I don't seem to have much green. We've done the summer chop in the garden, so although I have a garden of green, none of it is very long. So I do find it helpful when you're arranging flowers to have a really good base of greenery, and then that holds your flowers up. So whatever you choose,
I'm sure it'll work out really, really well. But the point today is this sort of crafted element, and then we're going to build on to create a whole montage of what we're going to be doing. So this is going to be close overhead work today. So I'm going to bring the side camera on, and then you'll be able to see exactly what I'm going to do. So if you have any questions on the work, don't forget to leave them in the chat button, and I will look up from time to time and see whether I can see whether there's anything you need me to answer for you. I'm getting all confused with my words today. So this is probably a technique that you have seen before. So I'm going to use my jar, and I'm going to coat it with my white straws. So to do this, I would take one of my elastic bands, double it round, and put it on the container. So it's a tiny bit loose at the moment. The problem is, if I go around a third time, it's going to be so tight that I'm not going to be able to slide my straws underneath. So even though it looks too loose, I think it's going to be too tight to go around a third time. And this will just depend on the size of the jar you're using. So when I use my regular jam jar for the demonstration piece, I did just double it round. And I'm going to use two elastic bands, even though my jar is small. Sometimes if you just go for one, your straws will slop all over the place. So it's whatever you find easiest. So what we could do is very laboriously feed in these straws underneath each of the elastic bands, which is going to be like watching paint dry. So you could do it in bulk quantities if you want. So take a handful, shuffle them down, and then slide them into the elastic bands. So you can see the other reason why I've chosen a really small container, so that you won't sit here for half an hour as I go round adding all my straws. And the next question I can imagine will be, well, how many straws do you need to use? And the answer to that is, I don't know, because of course it all depends on the container you are covering, how large it is. But what I am doing, can you see here? I'm making two lines of straws. So I've got this inner edge of straw. So if you've used this technique before with kebab sticks or twigs or something like that, you've probably just gone round once. I have gone round with a double layer. So you can imagine one at a time would take quite a while, and then going round a second time, which is why this bundling method, if you can get it to work, is just going to be much quicker. And like everything, when you think you've practically finished, you'll look around and think, just one more straw, just one more straw. We have knitted down quite nicely. You can tamp it down the top and the bottom. You see where we go. I'm just going to, my elastic bands have rolled down onto one another. I'm going to try and keep them separate so it holds my straws upright. So I've gone round one complete circle, but I've only gone 2/3 of the way round with my second ring, so I need to put in more straws on the top. And again, you could do this one at a time if you wanted to, but what I just find it easier to just get them onto the elastic band and then sort of roll and manipulate them around, but whatever suits you. And if you were doing this, making in front of the telly this evening, you don't need to do it quickly, you could just go one at a time. So just checking, oh, here I've got 3 rows round, that wasn't right. And maneuver around until they're all sitting in the right place. Still got 3 over. I'm going to take my 3s out. I don't want 3 levels. So I'm just a tiny bit short over here, so I think I will take the time to put those in one at a time. And as I say, you think you've gone all the way around, and there just seems to be constantly space for one more straw. And I reckon, actually 2 more, I reckon there's a tiny, tiny gap just there. So 2 more, and we're going to call that quits. So that is the first stage complete. So I'm going to remove the elastic bands later, not just yet. Next stage is to create this little decorative detail with the straws we're fanning out. So I'm just going to eye this up. I'm going to come down, I don't know, 5 centimetres or so. And I'm going to just use my fingernail to give it a little bit of an imprint. So I've got something to fold against, like this. Now, you might want to think, do you want to put every outer straw down, or do you want to go every other? And this is entirely up to you. But again, perhaps for speed, I will go every other. And I did go every other on my sample piece, because I thought the time I've folded down all those straws around the edge of that bigger container, it would just take me forever to do. So I'm not measuring it. If you're really fine and precise when you work, you might want to measure it down and perhaps, have a ruler and just bend it over the top of the ruler. I've just eyed it up, and then if it looks like you've got a bit of a wobble towards the end, you can just, adjust when you go back. So round and round, just bracing the fold against my fingernail and just eyeing it up round the edges. Now here, I've come back to the beginning. I've got 2 straws left, so I'm going to add in an extra straw just so that it's totally balanced. I've not got to, bodge the join, so to speak. So I'll put that in there. So I think I need to put another one in there. It does eat straws, this project. So I've now got 3 straws. So I'll bring the middle one down, and that is stage 1 complete. So you can see I've got a little sort of central area where I can put my fresh flowers down in my water at the end, and then I've got these spokes and these spikes where I can start doing my little weaving decorative detail. So I've got my wool here. I'm conscious of the fact it's very pale. You may have trouble seeing it, but I will show you the close-up of the finished one that I'm looking at. So you need to tie a knot, however best you can tie a knot. I like doing clove hitches for these kind of things, where I make a little loop and a little loop and put one behind the other, but whatever kind of knot you want. So I pull that tight there and let that end piece dangle. You need to make sure, as obvious as it seems, that you're weaving with the long piece that's still attached to your wool, and you haven't started off doing your weaving with your tail piece, and you can only get so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold that piece down. In fact, I could use the elastic band just to tuck it out of the way so I don't get confused. And I have still tucked down the wrong piece. Tuck down the loose piece, not the bit that's connected to my wool. So that just disappears. I'm going to leave that long because I can tie a knot at the end. It'll be fastened together. And then I'm taking my piece of wool. Now this reminded me, when I did my sample piece, of doing German knitting. I wonder whether the same sort of action will bring memories back of German knitting for you. I'm going along to the straw and going underneath and round the top. You cannot weave conventionally by going up and down because the straws are too far apart. You're going to be going around a circle. And you will see that as you start weaving, it just like a lot of the projects we do, it takes a while to start because you think, what on earth is happening here? Is it actually coming together? But you just need to spend a little bit of time. Now, actually, what I did when I made mine, that's now run off the kitchen table, the ball of wool. I put a film on. I was watching, I've discovered a new YouTube channel. So I was rather excited to watch. And now I'm back to the beginning. Like that. So conscious of the fact I'm using pale on pale. But you just continue round and round, and round and round. So can you see what I'm doing okay? Suggestion in the chat. I'm thinking embroidery. And we call this wrapping technique a spider's wheel. Never done big, going to love having a go. That's good. Spider's wheel, I never knew that. So I have done this technique before when I've used heavy gauge floristry wires instead of using the straws, and then used either a decorative coloured reel wire or the binding wire from, you know, the mossing wire from the Christmas stories. So it's not difficult, it is just time consuming and laborious. And you just need to make sure that you actually twist it round each of the pegs. And I think the problem that arose before when I missed a section was probably because I was having a slurp of tea and I hadn't quite, you know, taken notice of where I'd stopped. And I'd inadvertently, you know, moved one straw too far. So is that technique enough of a technique for you? Do you want me to sit here and bind this for the next 20 minutes? So it's time consuming. It's not impossible. I would think probably it's going to take you 20 minutes to do this bit. And the more you add in, the tighter things become. You just need to make sure you don't pull too tightly, because you can see as the spokes splay, there's a narrow gap there and it's slightly wider here. But the tension will work out because you're working slowly round and round. The tension will work out. And then when you think you've just about finished, I would then push all the winding down. That will give you a really compact finish to your spider's wheel. And with mine, I decided when I got to the end that I did like 4 wrapping rounds and then moved off, and then 4 total ones, just to try and anchor it a little bit. But again, that's entirely up to you. And then I made sure I finished on the spoke I started on, and then I ended up with a piece of yarn here and I tied them. So underneath, I just tied a knot between the beginning and the end. And you know, it does show up on the back side, but we are not going to draw attention to the back side of this spider's wheel. We just want to have a look at the top. So I have gone underneath each time and round over the top. Of course, you could always go straight over the top and go underneath, but whichever way you start winding, you would need to continue winding that way in order that your work looks nice and neat. So once you carry on, I'll just bring across the finished one, where it's got the darker wool, so you can see more clearly. So because I've gone underneath each time, it then looks like, you know, the little bits of straw are lying across the weave, and that's sort of the magic of doing this. It looks like you've got a disc of wool at the bottom, and then as if you've individually wrapped each of these straws across the top. And what I did right at the end is, because I eyed up where to pull the straws down, I hadn't got them accurately the same length. So what I then did was I went round individually and I've cut all my straws to length. Now, when you're doing this, it's quite hard to get your scissors in to do it sort of across that way. So I turned this on its side and I did the scissors and I just went from front to back with my scissors. I think it's a little bit of a shame if you decide to trim them down, because you can see that as I go to trim, you squash the straws and then you have to sort of reshape them a bit, so you don't get that really polished, you know, look. I think it's much better if you are slightly more accurate with your bending down rather than guesstimating too much. But again, it's entirely up to you. But every single one of those straws I've cut, and I can just see that every single one of them has become slightly crushed. So I hope you can see what you'll end up with. And of course, it depends on the look you're after, you know, how much winding you do. It may be that you only want to do, you know, 1 centimetre of winding. And do you want to cut your straws really short, or do you want to have, you know, more of the white of your straw exposed? There's all these little sort of design changes that you can really make this technique your own by adapting it to, you know, the amount of yarn you've got, the amount of time you've got to make it. And I chose this as a contrasting yarn so you could see it. I think this looks a little bit like ice cream. So the subtle pastel colours don't really go with the flowers I'm going to be using. And then with the white here, it does blend in a little bit more. It's not white, it's very, very pale pink. So not quite so dominant. So I can get away with my more colourful flowers. And can you see here at the moment, the straws are still sort of splaying upright, but when you've finished, they do become horizontal. And actually, if you think that, you know, you can push it gently down so they sit where you want them to sit, and it does become a much sturdier structure the more times you go round and round and round. So once you have finished and gone all the way around, and let me, I will just cut off, and I'm going to just tie that off for the moment, like that. And I'll come and finish this when we make and create. I'm just rescuing my wool that's fallen on the kitchen floor. And then thinking about, you know, getting rid of the straws, because the elastic bands, they're just there to hold everything in place while you work. So imagine you've done all your binding, and then you would take your wool, or your, you know, it could be that you might, you know, do you keep it the same colour, or do you choose different colour, or using string or ribbon or whatever it is you want to use. So I just go round and round, pulling quite firmly, because if it's too loose, it's going to just fall down like an old pair of tights, and your straws are just going to collapse all over the place. So I'm going around how many times, 5 or 6 times like that, pulling it nice and tightly, just trying to get it off that elastic band, and then tying it in a knot. And at this point, being quite careful, because you have to lie it down. It's much easier to do this if you've got a friend that can put a finger on your knot, and then tie it nice and securely. This is when you need the finger on the knot, and to tie a knot there. And I've decided I don't want to make a feature of the tied ends, because I think the frill around the top, or even the top, is quite decorative. So I just tie a knot and then cut it really close to, and then you can take your elastic band away, and then you do exactly the same thing for the piece at the top. And then you decide, you know, what spacing you want, whether you want, you know, really low, halfway through, you know, high, and, you know, perhaps even you want to add in another band as well. So that's entirely up to you. So I quite like the fact here that I have used the paler wool here, because it's not so obvious that that the necessity of tying this belt round, you know, blends a bit more. But if you use something more highly contrast, it does become part of the overall design. So let's imagine that I have finished this, and I will finish it. If those of you who are staying later on, I will go all the way around the edge and think about adding some flowers in. So what I'll do next is go back to my overhead camera, and I'll show you how I'll put a simple vase arrangement together, and then just choose a few of the stems that are in my main vase to sit in my little cocktail glass here, and then the two pieces can sit together. And of course, if you don't want to make the jug arrangement, it doesn't, you know, you don't have to. You could just make your little cocktail, flower cocktail, off on one side. So just bear with me a moment while I shuffle the camera back again. Not quite sure how to bring those second. I just have to reach around, I think, when I'm ready for those flowers. So you can see the difference in size of the finished container according to the base jar, the glass jar, the jam jar, or the drinking glass you're going to have. So that was a standard jam jar, and that was the skinny anchovy jar. So even the skinny jar has come out quite chunky. In fact, it's probably come out the size of a jam jar. I'm probably making that very complicated. But I've just felt that this one with the jam jar with my jug was a bit too, I wanted the jug to be the dominant element, and the glass jar to be like a, you know, a joyful aside, really, which is why I've gone for the smaller one overall. But of course, if you weren't doing the jug at all, that you could do them any size, and you could group them, and you could come, you know, taller containers, smaller containers. The choice is entirely yours. So I'm just going to, that's my camera angle. I'm conscious you can't quite see my table very well. There we go, that's slightly better. So I shall move that mouse. Come back to this one in a moment. And then come back with my jug arrangement here. So this is just a standard jug, very ordinary charity shop find. So I'm going to start off with my greenery that's going in here. So this is ivy. It's nice and bushy, really plentiful in our garden, and rather handily, it's got quite a draping habit here. So I'm going to start off by putting this first into my container, and then always measuring up and recutting my stems. So it's a bit of bouncing out of the container there. Stay put, please. It's a little bit top heavy. Perhaps there's a little bit too much draping going on. So I'm pulling off any leaves that are going to go in the waterline, and I am interweaving those, and it just gives me a green haze. That's all I'm after, is a lovely green haze that is forming the backdrop to the rest of my arrangements. I'm conscious of the fact it's ivy, it's not very special, but it just needs to do its job of holding up my other flowers. So I had 3 stems I've made into 4 placements, and it just sits there. So probably, if you want to think about it, north, south, west, east, and then to add my flowers. So because my container is quite large and chunky, I can get away with adding some quite big flowers. So sunflowers, here we are. So it's going to be, my sunflower is going to be way too big for my little jam jar next to it. It's going to be too top heavy. So I'm recutting the stems. I am managing to use my kitchen scissors for this one. Not quite as chunky as the stems last week. I'm putting those in there. So these are quite large headed flowers. So they may well be quite top heavy. So you saw when I put that first one in, the placement was about right, but it was just a bit too heavy. And I'm making this an all-round arrangement. It's sort of a one-off, you know, one up from a cut and plonk, really. It's really just to get the flowers in the vase, to provide the foil for the little cocktail drink alongside. So I'm going to do it forward facing towards you. So when I turn that around to the back, there's nothing happening. So that is where my wall is going to be when I'm placing these. So I'm going to try and arrange it in mirror image so you can see what I'm doing. So that's my main flower, my wildflower. And then coming in with my roses. So I'm going to keep quite a lot of greenery on the roses. Just add, you know, because I don't want that ivy to be the dominant thing you see. Just a nice little bit of green. And I am eyeing up my cutting and my placement here, just a quick arrangement. Of course, you've seen last week's video. You can do your measuring slower if that is what you want to do. So this is a quick cut and plonk, really, in order that we can stage the beautiful handymanship we've done with our crafted element. So the more flowers you add in, the more sturdy they become, the more robust your arrangement is, and you can stand flowers, you know, totally upright. I'm thinking I need something down here, which is why you should never really arrange your flowers in the mirror, because you need to be able to see what you're doing. So I'll just turn it around to me for a few minutes. So I'm trying to make sure that the colour goes all the way through the vase and the flowers aren't just at the top. You can see that as I bring it back. The colour is coming a little bit lower. And of course, every time you look, you see somewhere else that needs a flower. So I'm arranging sitting down. So I don't know about you. Normally I'd arrange standing up. I'm going to cut that really short. And of course, you would be looking and adjusting and reflecting. There. That's back a little bit. And then off to the side with that, and then come in with my contrasting flower. This would look lovely, wouldn't it? Perhaps even with some gypsophilia that I'd spray painted yellow. I could really kept all the yellows down. I'm going to infill with my contrasting materials. So these are my asters, and again they've got quite a little bit of greenery on them, so it's quite a good greenery flower to use. And also, as they start to open out, they're quite pale to start with, and when they do fully open out, they've got a little yellow head in them, so it's quite a handy flower to have. And in season at the moment, so it's quite nice to buy something from the supermarket. It's British grown and just season. These aren't year-round flowers. Of course, the roses are year-round flowers now, but the sunflowers and the asters are seasonal speciality. And I'll be able to, you know, we could have a whole class on doing a vase arrangement, but you get the idea. I could add in more flowers. I'm just going to twist it towards me just to bring some of that purple down towards the front, so it doesn't look like I've got 2 arrangements on the go. Just bringing the colour from the top right the way down into the centre of the arrangement. So I've added in that one and that one, and again I will fill out later on. This pointless having flowers that just left over. You may as well get as many of them as you can into your arrangement. And do I need the pink as a little, you know, a contrasting detail? The thing then is just to try it. So I will twist towards me again, remembering which way is the front. There's definitely a bald bit at the back that you are looking at. So having to get rid of quite a little bit of the side shoots from my stems of my spray carnation, struggling with the name there, just getting rid of anything that's going to sit inside the water. I don't want that rotting off. And I always think, you know, should I add in this extra flower? Should I not? Well, put in a few stems first and see. And I would say on the whole, I think the more flowers you add, the better your arrangement looks. And I've definitely now got that small, medium and large, the 1, 2, 3 of my flowers. It just gives a nice, pleasant placing. Huge sunflower, middle-sized rose and aster, and then a smaller flower at the end as well. So again, I'm probably wasting lots of bits. I shall be scurrying around when I finish filming, putting about all the bits I've discarded, and they will go back into my vase. So that's just a really, really super quick arrangement, all because I wanted you to see what the flowers looked like with the second placement next door. So I could perhaps save some of these stems now. I'm just going to sweep those off into the bin next to me. And then the second placement, the star of our show. So imagine I've taken the elastic band off, I've wrapped the second bit of yarn at the top. Imagine I've got my whole plate of spider's wheel weaving across the top. And then it's a case of adding a flower in, something that talks to the main arrangement, but doesn't have to mimic it. I mean, it would just be too much. And because we've spent, you know, a long time crafting this effectively a very fancy bud vase, you don't want to overpower it really. It can just get away with, you know, 1 or 2 flowers. So I can see in the comments there, the greens go well together, yeah, and very constant spry, yes. Very of the moment for quite, you know, a dated flower arrangers. Everything comes back, doesn't it? So I am measuring up there. You know, you can see just 1 rose would perhaps look lovely. Now, of course, even though my jam jar is quite narrow-headed, when I put my flower in, it is going to move to one side a little bit. So what you can do is, I'm just thinking now, I might put another rose in slightly lower down to sort of wedge it in place. So again, measuring up, a bit of sunshine yellow coming across. Again, I don't want too much green on this. I can sort of hint of a bit of green, but not necessarily too much. So I might leave it at that for the moment. I didn't want to overpower it, and probably it might look better if I momentarily move to one side, and then you could see the flowers. That's even better. Just want to make sure they're all facing you. So a bit of the zhuzh and bring it all forwards. The vase isn't going to topple over because it's really, really heavy. So there's no problem with it all being forward facing. If I show you the back, it's quite flat backed and just green like that. So it's a nice, heavy, solid vase against what will be my wall. So just make sure you can see it. I've paid for those flowers. I want you to be able to see them. And then if I step away with the second flower there, I should move that out of the way back. You can see that the 2 talk together. So a little bit of background there. And, you know, probably I might put another asters in. Let's see. Aster perhaps. Just to bring, because that purple and yellow is so dominant. I don't want to overdo it. I just want to be, you know, a subtle sort of combination really of the 2. Now I think I've cut that one too short. I'm going to cut this one short. They were coming across at the same level. I want to have those all slightly different heights. So that is the end of today's demonstrations. We've packed a lot in. How to make a classic constant spry inspired flower arrangement. But the star of the show today is really that spider's wheel weave with that lovely woolen element. And actually, as I look, you sometimes wonder, don't you, why you picked certain colours. So I knew I was using white straws right from way off, but I noticed now that the container that I had my flowers in is practically exactly the same colour pink. So perhaps I should do a second arrangement with all my other flowers. And although that's really large, when I place it, I can place it behind my container here with the pink. And that would, you know, make it appear smaller. So there's lots of ways that you can play around with your flowers to get the sort of dominance and the balance just right. And at times like this, you think yellow handle scissors are really great because it really brings the colour then right down to the edge of your tabletop. So when I can reach across to the stop button, I'm going to finish the recording now. So those of you who are joining me next week, you'll need your sticking plasters and a wine bottle. It sounds like a recipe for a disaster, doesn't it, after a night out? And then I will take you all off mute and we can have a proper chat about the techniques, and I can answer any specific questions if you didn't think that if you've got questions, if something wasn't clear, I'm happy to talk you through the detail of that. And then, of course, those of you who are staying on later, we can have a more informal chat as we work together. And I will finish off my little piece here that I started in class. So I'm going to say goodbye to those that are watching record, and then we'll carry on with everyone else who's watching in the room.